It's amazing. Kamani Brooks was 36 years old and he believed in one thing above everything else. If you build it right, it will hold. He had lived by that his entire life. As a structural engineer, as a husband, as a man who poured everything he had, quietly without fanfare, into a marriage he thought was built to last. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon in Atlanta, he drove past a cafe 2 blocks from his wife's office and heard her say his name like it was something she was trying to put down. Just 2 more weeks, Javen, then we can start over. This time I won't be carrying any baggage. She didn't see him. She was pacing the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, completely unbothered by the drizzle. The baggage she was talking about, that was him. Her husband of 4 years. But here is what Zariah did not know. What she could not have known because she had underestimated him from the very beginning. By the time she said those words on that sidewalk, Kamani had already quietly transferred $2.3 million worth of assets beyond her reach completely legally, completely cleanly. And there was not a single thing she could do about it. She thought she had a plan. She didn't know he already had one. Before we get into exactly how this unfolded, and I promise you every piece of it is worth staying for, I want to say something to everyone listening right now. If you have ever loved someone fully, given them your loyalty and your best years and your whole heart, and then found out they were quietly calculating against you in the dark, this story is for you. Stay with me because what Kayani did next is the kind of steady, patient justice that restores your faith in good people. Alright, let's go back to where this really began. Atlanta, Georgia. Early spring, the kind of morning where the air still carries the last bite of winter. But the dogwood trees along the neighborhood streets are already going pink at the tips, as if they simply cannot wait. The sky was pale blue and unhurried. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower was running its first pass of the season. Kamani was up before 6, the way he always was. Coffee in the maker, work boots by the door, a fresh set of blueprints spread across the kitchen table. He had a site visit indicator at 8, a mid-rise residential project, foundation inspection, the kind of work that rewards patience and punishes shortcuts. He poured his coffee into a travel mug, checked the weather on his phone, and tucked the blueprints into his field bag. Quiet, ordered, deliberate, the same way he did most things. He and Zariah had been together 6 years, married 4. From the outside, and plenty of people had said so. They looked like everything a couple was supposed to be. He was steady and successful, the kind of man who shows up and follows through. She was beautiful and electric, a PR executive with a gift for making every room feel lit up from the inside. Zariah Brooks was ambitious, polished, always reaching for something just a little beyond where she currently stood. Kamani had always been proud of that about her. Their home sat on a quiet street in southwest Atlanta, a 4-bedroom he had helped design himself with a wide front porch and a young oak tree in the backyard he'd planted the first spring they moved in. On Sunday mornings, he used to bring her coffee out to that porch. She used to say it was her favorite hour of the week. Those Sunday mornings had quietly stopped somewhere in the past 6 months. He couldn't tell you the exact date. That's how it is with slow changes. You don't notice the shoreline moving until you look up one day and the water looks different. 6 months ago, small things began to shift. Zariah started taking her phone everywhere. Not just to the next room, everywhere. The bathroom, the laundry room, out to the mailbox to grab a single piece of mail. In 6 years, she had never once changed her phone passcode. Then one morning, Kamani absent-mindedly reached over to silence her alarm while she was in the shower, and the phone didn't recognize his thumbprint anymore. He set it back on the nightstand without a word. When her phone rang at dinner, she would excuse herself to the porch. Through the window, he could see her out there. Her whole posture transformed, lighter, animated in a way she no longer was with him, with the easy body language of a person who felt completely free. When he would ask about it later, she would smile warmly and say, "Just work stuff, babe. You know how clients get." He would nod. He would go back to his blueprints and he would think, because Kimani Brooks does not panic. He observes, he measures, he identifies where stress is collecting long before the first visible crack appears. That is not just how he works. That is who he is. So on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, when he drove past the cafe and heard his wife's voice drifting through his cracked window, easy, bright, full of plans that had no room for him, he didn't slam the brakes. He didn't get out of the truck. He didn't call her name. He gripped the steering wheel. He breathed. He watched her pace the wet sidewalk, laughing now, describing a new life to a man named Javian as though the old one had already been cleared away. Something cold and clear and very, very calm settled into his chest. This was not a wife drifting. This was a wife who had already decided and was now working out the details. So, he made a decision, too. Up next, you'll see exactly what Kamani did in the quiet weeks that followed, and how a single discreet meeting with a trusted attorney set something in motion that Zaraya never saw coming. If your spouse secretly changed their phone password today, would you say something or stay quiet and watch? Drop yes or no in the comments right now. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself like a storm. It moves in the way water does. Patient, unhurried, working its way into every small gap until one morning you realize the whole foundation has shifted and you never once heard a sound. That was the texture of these months for Kamani. He went to work. He came home. He said good morning and good night. He passed Zaraya in the kitchen, asked about her day, sat across from her at dinner, and watched her perform a version of their marriage like a woman rehearsing for a closing scene. She was good at it, practiced and warm and convincingly present, but not quite good enough for a man who reads structures for a living. About 3 weeks after the cafe, Zaraya began working their finances into casual conversation. Always offhand, always reasonable sounding, the way you mentioned needing to pick up milk. But she kept returning to it, each time repackaging the same idea in slightly different words. One Sunday morning, sitting at the kitchen island with her coffee and her tablet, she looked up and said, "You know, I've been thinking. We should probably get all our important documents in one place. Passwords, savings info, investment accounts, just in case something ever happened." Her voice was smooth. Her eyes were on her tablet. "That's a good idea," Kamani said simply. She smiled, and went back to scrolling. He finished his coffee, rinsed his mug, set it in the rack, and that afternoon he called Quillan Lang. Quillan Lang had been practicing law for 23 years. He kept a quiet office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta. Leather chairs, a long view of the city, and a reputation for getting complex things done cleanly. He was 48 years old, precise in his speech, and allergic to unnecessary drama. He and Kamani had worked together since 2019 when Kamani first formed the LLC that would become the quiet backbone of his financial life. That construction company, 2 crews and a single excavator when it started, had grown steadily, while Zaraya attended networking events and planned weekend trips to Savannah. Most people in their social circle, including Zaraya, had only a surface understanding of what Kamani actually had. They saw the salary. They didn't see what sat underneath it. They met on a Wednesday afternoon, the city gray and overcast outside the window. Kimani laid out the situation plainly. No drama, no tears, timeline, behavior, his own assessment of where things were heading. Quillan sat down his pen. "Has she retained anyone? Filed anything? Not that I can find. Then we have a window. But it needs to be used carefully, and it needs to be used now." Over the following 6 weeks, they worked through every asset methodically. The marital home, valued at $920,000. 4 rental properties accumulated over 7 years, managed through the LLC, producing steady income Zariah had never paid much attention to. The construction company itself, which had recently closed a significant commercial contract, and a personal investment fund Kamani had been building since his late 20s. Now standing at $680,000 together, approximately $2.3 million one by one, with documentation at every step. Those assets were transferred into an irrevocable trust established in the name of Tendai Brooks, Kimani's mother, a woman of 62 who had quietly co-signed his first business loan and never once asked for anything back. In the joint checking account left $28,000. Enough to look like a normal balance, not enough to suggest he had been preparing for anything. The critical thing, Quillen told him, is the timeline. Every transfer has to be completed and documented well before any divorce filing appears. Under Georgia law, if there's no evidence of intent to defraud at the time of the transfer, it holds. We are building a clean record. Every date, every signature, every filing stamp. Kamani nodded once and signed where he was told. Back at home, the performance continued and quietly escalated. Zariah became noticeably warmer. Attentive in ways she hadn't been in months, she started making his coffee in the mornings unprompted. She asked about his projects with what seemed like genuine curiosity. She touched his arm when she passed him in the kitchen, a small recurring gesture that once would have felt like affection. He accepted all of it without comment. Then, about 2 weeks before the trust documents were finalized, she appeared in the bedroom doorway one evening in new lingerie, expensive, clearly deliberate, and leaned against the frame with a quiet smile. "Come to bed," she said softly. Kamani looked up from the report he was reading. He took in the full picture, not with desire, but with the same focused attention he gave a building that wasn't behaving the way it should. "I'm worn out tonight, sweetheart. Big deadline this week." A small apologetic smile. "Rain check." Something moved behind her eyes in the fraction of a second before her smile returned. "Not hurt." Recalculation. "Of course," she said, and turned back down the hallway. Kimani waited until he heard her bedroom door close. Then he set the report on his chest and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. He thought of what Kian had mentioned early on, almost in passing. Watch for a sudden warmth after a long cold period. It often means someone is building a version of events they intend to tell later. He thought of the cafe sidewalk, the wet pavement, the ease in her voice when she spoke about Javian. He thought, "You're testing the waters, and you are, by my count, about 8 weeks too late." The trust documents were signed on a Thursday evening. The last signature on the last page. Quan sliding the completed file into a folder with the quiet satisfaction of a job done correctly. Kamani drove home in the dark, the city moving around him, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Solid ground. He didn't have to wait long after that. The following Thursday, Zariah made a careful dinner. Table set properly. Soft music. The kind of atmosphere that announces something is coming. They ate. She asked about his mother. He talked about a project indicator. Then she set down her fork. She turned off the music. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with clear, prepared eyes. "Kimani, I want a divorce." She had reasons ready. She needed space. She had given up too much of herself. She deserved to live for her own future. She even raised the subject of romance, which required a particular kind of nerve given everything, and said carefully that she had felt unseen for a long time. Kamani listened to every word without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. "Okay," he said. That was all she had clearly expected more. Some fracture, some visible collapse she could point to later. She got a quiet man with level eyes and a relaxed posture who reached for his glass of water like she'd just told him about the weather because the foundation had already been laid. She just didn't know it yet. "Don't go anywhere. Because what happens inside that mediation room downtown is the moment Zariah realizes she has made the most costly miscalculation of her life. And there is nothing left to do but watch it land. There is a particular kind of silence that only lives inside a law office. Not the comfortable quiet of a Sunday morning. Not the peaceable hush that settles over a house at the end of a long day. This is a pressurized silence. The kind that holds everything that's about to be said and everything that cannot be taken back. The kind where every shifted chair and every turned page sounds just a little too loud. That was the silence in the conference room on the 22nd floor of a downtown Atlanta office building on a crisp Tuesday morning. Zariah arrived first. She came with her attorney, Dana Price. Sharp, prepared, the kind of lawyer who sets a thick binder on the table with deliberate authority and lets the weight of it speak before she says a word. Dana wore a charcoal blazer and moved through the room with the energy of someone who had won tables like this before. Zariah sat beside her, hair and makeup precise, posture upright. She had dressed for this the way she dressed for a high-stakes client presentation. Composed, polished, projecting the quiet confidence of a woman who knows how the room is going to go. She had her legal pad, her list, her expectations. Kamani came in quietly, navy suit, no tie. He took the chair directly across from her, set both hands flat on the table, and looked at his wife with the same calm, unreadable expression he carried on every job site. The look of a man who already knows where the stress is and has already accounted for it. Quillen Lang sat beside him. No binder, no performance, just a single manila folder and an air of complete relaxation. Dana Price opened her binder. She outlined Zariah's demands without hesitation. 50% of the marital home, 50% of any business interests formed during the marriage, full access to joint savings, spousal support of $8,500 per month for 5 consecutive years. Each number was delivered crisply, professionally, with the practiced pace of someone who has done this many times and expects a particular kind of reaction on the other side of the table. Zariah watched Kamani's face as each figure was named. She was looking for something to move, a tightening in the jaw, a slight widening of the eyes, the almost imperceptible drop in the shoulders that tells you the other person knows they've been outmaneuvered. Kamani's face gave her nothing. He wasn't even looking at Dana. He was resting his gaze calmly somewhere above the window with the patient expression of a man listening to information he had already processed. Dana finished. The room went quiet. Quan reached for his folder. Unhurried. Easy. The way you reach for something you've been expecting to need. Before we proceed, I'd ask that you take a moment to review the updated financial disclosures. He slid the folder across the table. Dana picked it up, opened it. Her eyes moved down the first page. Then she stopped. She turned to the second page, then the third. Zariah leaned in. She scanned the first few lines. And then something happened to her face that no amount of preparation could have prevented. The composure she had walked in with began to dissolve. Not all at once, but in stages, like watching a carefully arranged display slowly come apart. Her hands resting on her legal pad began to tremble slightly, then visibly. The legal pad slid an inch sideways. She didn't reach for it. The color left her face. First, the flush of confidence, then the warmth underneath it. And then everything else until she looked like a woman standing too long in cold air. The pages slipped from her fingers. Some fanned across the table. 2 drifted to the floor. She didn't move to pick them up. Because what those papers showed was this. 2 full months before Zariah had ever uttered the word divorce. Before the candle-lit dinner, before the folded hands, before the rehearsed speech about needing space and living for herself, every significant asset connected to Kamani Brooks had been legally and completely transferred into an irrevocable trust, the marital home, the rental properties, the construction company and its active contracts, the investment fund. All of it documented and finalized, placed under the stewardship of his mother, Tendiwahi Brooks. The total remaining in the joint marital account, $28,000. Dana Price's composure held, but only just. She looked up from the folder, voice carefully controlled. This trust was never disclosed. Coulin's tone remained pleasant. My client had no legal obligation to disclose assets transferred prior to any filing or formal proceeding. The trust was established and fully recorded 2 months before Mrs. Brooks initiated divorce proceedings. The timeline is documented, witnessed, and clean. Under Georgia law, this does not constitute any form of improper transfer. A beat of absolute silence. Then Zariah's voice cut through the room. How long have you known? It was not the voice she had walked in with. Every note of polish and preparation was gone. What came out was raw and exposed and stripped down to something real. Kamani turned and looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time that morning. He let the silence sit for a moment, not cruelly, but completely. Long enough. He said, "You planned this." Her voice cracked. "You sat across from me every single night, and you planned this whole thing, Zariah." His voice was quiet, not raised, not unkind, just immovable, the way a well-set beam is immovable. "You made your plans, I made mine. The difference is mine were legal and mine were finished first." She pointed at him across the table, eyes red. "You did this to destroy me." He held her gaze without blinking. "I did this to protect what I built," he said. "Every floor, every wall, every foundation I've ever laid, I built it to hold. This was no different." The room went still. Even Dana Price, who had seen a great many mediation rooms in 20 years of practice, had nothing to say for several seconds. For the first time since she had walked in, since she had started planning this months ago, since she had stood on a rain-slicked sidewalk talking about her fresh start, Zariah felt something she had not anticipated. Fear. The specific hollow fear of someone who has just realized the floor they were standing on was never really there. Dana spent the next 40 minutes working methodically through every available angle. She challenged the trust timeline. She questioned the valuation of the construction company, arguing that its growth during the marriage constituted marital contribution. She asked for additional documentation. Quillen provided everything she asked for, answered every question with the same unhurried patience, and did not move from his position. By noon, the picture was clear. There would be number $460,000 from the house, no stake in the business, number $8,500 monthly payment. The joint account, $28,000, would be divided according to Georgia's standard guidelines. Zariah had walked into that room expecting to walk out financially transformed. She was going to walk out with $14,000 and a memory she would spend years sitting with on the sidewalk outside the building afterward while Dana took a call 10 feet away. Zariah stood alone in the noon sun and tried to absorb the shape of what had just happened. She thought about how certain she had been. The dinner, the rehearsed words, the way she had dressed this morning like a woman who already knew she had won. She had expected Kimani to be stunned, undone, scrambling. Instead, she had watched him sit across a table for 2 hours with the undisturbed patience of a man who had already settled everything that mattered before she ever walked through the door. She had spent months believing she was the one with the plan. She had never been. But the conference room was only the first surprise. Because at that exact moment, a man named Rashad Cross, a mutual friend who had been quietly sitting on his phone for 3 days, wrestling with what he knew and what he owed, had just made a decision. And he pressed send. Stay close, because what Rashad shares next exposes not just what Zariah did, but what the man she chose had been planning to do to both of them all along. And once it gets out, there will be no containing it. Rashad Cross had known both Kamani and Zariah for 4 years. He was the kind of friend who showed up with a cooler to your housewarming and stayed to help you hang the last picture frame. He had been at their wedding reception, had watched Zaraya give her toast with a champagne flute raised and her eyes full of what looked at the time like genuine love. He had also been sitting inside a group chat for 6 weeks that he deeply wished he had never been added to. The chat was named New Chapter. It had been started by Javian and it included Javian, Zaraya, and 2 men from Javian's professional circle, colleagues from his marketing firm who apparently thought the whole situation was entertaining. Rashad had been pulled in by accident. Same first name as someone in Javian's network. Nobody had ever noticed the error. Nobody had thought to check. So for 6 weeks, Rashad had read everything and grown steadily, deeply uncomfortable. He told himself it wasn't his business. He told himself that getting involved would cost him friendships on both sides and that people's marriages were not his to manage. He almost convinced himself. Then the night before the mediation, Javon posted a voice note in the chat. It was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. Rashad played it once. Then he played it again. Then he sat on the edge of his couch in his apartment staring at his phone and made up his mind. He took screenshots of the entire conversation history. Every message, every voice note, every exchange going back 6 weeks. He attached them to a text and sent them to Kimani with 4 words. "Brother, you need to see this." Kimani received the message at 9:47 that evening. The house was quiet. He was at the kitchen table, a glass of water, no television, just the ambient stillness of a home that had been feeling like a waiting room for months. He opened the screenshots and began to read. Javian's voice note was recorded in the relaxed, unhurried tone of a man who believed himself completely safe. He spoke about the situation the way someone talks about a transaction they're happy with. Comfortable, a little boastful, glad to share the details. He told his friends that Zaraya's husband, some quiet engineer, keeps to himself, pulled in around 120,000 a year, maybe slightly more. He didn't know about the rental properties. He didn't know about the business. He had no idea that when you added everything up, he was sitting next to a woman married to someone worth nearly 10 times what she had told him. Once the paperwork goes through, Javian said lightly, "We're looking at splitting something real. She thinks we're riding off into the sunset, but between us, I've been talking to someone else for the past month. I'll let Zaraya handle the legal side. Take my cut of whatever shakes loose and move on. Easy." Kamani set his phone face down on the table. He sat in the quiet for a long moment with the particular stillness of a man who has just had every remaining question answered and finds that the answer is even worse than he expected and is somehow not surprised. The rain had started outside. A soft Atlanta drizzle against the kitchen window, the kind that blurs the street lights into soft smears of gold. He looked at the window for a while, then he picked up his phone, forwarded everything to Quillan Lang, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He slept soundly for the first time in months. It was Tanduwai who suggested the family dinner. Zaraya had been making calls since the mediation, reaching out to Kamani's extended family with her version of events. She framed it as a mutual parting, 2 people who had grown in different directions. She asked for a chance to speak honestly, to explain herself, to be heard. Tendiwahi said she was welcome to come to dinner Saturday evening. Kamani was not there. That was intentional. Tendiwahi had been very clear about that when she called him. "Let me handle Saturday," she said. "You've done enough." Zaraya arrived with flowers for Tendiwahi and a carefully prepared emotional posture. The dignified, slightly wounded bearing of a woman who expects to be sympathized with. She hugged Kimani's aunts. She complimented the house. She accepted a glass of sweet tea and sat at the table like a guest who planned to leave on good terms. Tandawi had set the table with her good china and cooked the kind of meal that takes all morning, the kind that says without a single word, "This is a serious household and we are paying attention." Zarya began her explanation. She chose her words carefully. The marriage had become difficult. She had felt overlooked. She had needs that went unmet. It was the kind of language that sounds measured and mature in the right setting. At a table full of people who had known Kamani his entire life. It landed like a rehearsed speech at a kitchen table. Thandiwe listened to every word without interruption. She was patient that way. Always had been. She let people fully finish before she responded. Then she picked up her phone. She put on her reading glasses. And in her clear, unhurried voice, she read Javian's voice note aloud to the room. Every word of it. The table went very, very still. Zuriya's composed expression came apart in real time. Confusion moving into recognition. Recognition moving into something that looked like the ground dropping away beneath her. Those messages are being taken out of context. She started. Kamani's uncle set down his fork and shook his head once slowly. That was all. From the hallway doorway, there was movement. Javian had arrived a few minutes late, let in through the back, and had been standing in the hallway long enough to hear most of the reading. Long enough to understand the full picture of where the room was and what everyone at the table now knew. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at Zuriya. He looked at Thandiwe. He looked at the table full of faces watching him with complete clarity. He reached for his jacket on the hook by the door. He walked out. No words, no apology, no explanation. The back door clicked shut and his car started in the driveway. And within a minute, the sound of his engine had faded and the street was quiet again. Zuriya sat at the dinner table alone in the silence he left behind. The flowers she had brought Thandiwe were still on the counter, still wrapped in their plastic, never put in water. 4 days later, Zuriya went live on Instagram. It was late, close to 11 at night, and she had clearly not planned this carefully. Her eyes were red, her voice unsteady, and she told her 14,000 followers that Kimani had manipulated their finances and left her with nothing. She spoke for 22 minutes. She cried twice. She asked her audience to understand. She had not anticipated what came next. 40 minutes after she ended her stream, Kamani opened his own. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make accusations. He sat in a plain chair in a quiet room and shared his screen, scrolling slowly through the full message history from the group chat. Javian's voice note, the plans for Buckhead, the timeline of everything, while the viewer count climbed. 100,000, 500,000, 1.2 million in the first 30 minutes. The comments moved faster than anyone could follow. This is why men go quiet. She thought she was leaving him behind. She left herself behind. He didn't even raise his voice once. That says everything. The man built a fortress while she was planning a vacation. Zuriya's phone began lighting up with notifications she didn't open. Javian had already turned his account private by morning. By the end of the week, he had quietly begun seeing someone new, as if none of it had happened at all. Zuriya sat in her car in a parking lot in Buckhead, the neighborhood she had planned to move to, the life she had planned to step into, and looked at a phone that had gone completely, profoundly quiet. The new chapter she had designed so carefully had sealed itself shut before it ever really opened. And the man she had dismissed as ordinary was sleeping peacefully in a house she no longer had access to, protected by a structure she had never even known existed. We're almost at the end of this story. And the final chapter, the one where Kamani builds something new on the other side of all of this, is the part that will stay with you long after this video is over. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Zuriya first said the word. In the timeline of a legal proceeding, 4 months is relatively swift. In the emotional geography of everything that had passed between them, the mediation, the family dinner, the public unraveling, the long quiet afterward. Those 4 months felt both faster and heavier than any ordinary measure of time. Dana Price made one more formal attempt to challenge the trust, arguing that the construction company's growth during the marriage period warranted a larger equitable claim. Quillen answered it with the same organized patience he had brought to every stage of this process. The documentation held, the timeline held, the legal standing held. On the morning the final papers were signed, Kimani wore the same navy suit he'd worn to mediation. He signed his name in 3 places, thanked the notary by name, and shook Kian's hand in the hallway outside the conference room. He drove home in the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness. It was the quiet of something finished. The specific relief of a load you've been carrying finally being set down in its proper place. Zaraya walked out of the marriage with 1 suitcase and $14,000. The house she had lived in for 4 years. The wide front porch. The backyard she'd sunbathed in. The kitchen where she'd made careful meals while practicing careful lies had never technically been hers in the legal sense. Not anymore. She had assumed in the way people do when they're planning instead of thinking that proximity meant ownership. That 4 years and a marriage certificate created rights that no document could touch. She had not understood that a man who spends his professional life protecting structures knows exactly which elements need to be secured before the weight comes down. She moved back to her mother's house in College Park. The back bedroom, same pale yellow walls she remembered from childhood, same narrow closet, a twin bed that felt very small after years in a 4-bedroom home she'd helped pick out. Her mother made space without asking too many questions. That's what mothers do. The PR career, the one she had built her whole professional identity around, the media roundtables, the cultivated reputation, the image of a woman on the move, began to fray almost immediately. Clients are a particular kind of audience. They invest in reliability, in clean associations, in people whose names don't pull up controversy in a basic search. A public dispute with a documented paper trail and a live stream that had been watched by over 1 million people is not a clean association. 2 clients ended their contracts within 6 weeks. A third sent a carefully worded email about re-evaluating their communications partnership. Her agency placed her on administrative leave, the kind that everyone understands is permanent in everything but name. The future she had been reaching toward came apart not dramatically but completely. Javian moved through his social life as though the whole chapter had never happened, reappearing at events and gatherings with the easy confidence of a man who had not invested anything real and therefore lost nothing. Istmaz. He was photographed at a midtown rooftop gathering about a month after the divorce, laughing with a champagne flute in hand, entirely unbothered. Zaraya saw the photo. She sat with it for a long time at her mother's kitchen table in the house she grew up in, under the same light fixture she remembered from being a teenager. She thought about every justification she had built for herself. The story she had told herself about feeling unseen, about deserving more, about having the courage to choose a better life. She had rewritten so many small moments into evidence for a conclusion she had already reached. She thought about Javian walking out of Tanduwai's back door without a word. The flowers still in their plastic wrap on the counter. She thought about Kamani sitting across that mediation table with his hands flat and his eyes level, watching her demands dissolve in real time and never once raising his voice. She opened her messages. She typed slowly, deleted twice, and finally sent, "I know you won't respond to this. I don't expect you to. I just need to say I regret everything. You were a good man and I treated you like you were replaceable. I'm sorry." She sat her phone face down on the table. She listened to the kitchen clock. Kamani received the message on a quiet Tuesday evening. He was sitting on his front porch with a glass of water, watching the street do its ordinary evening things. A kid on a bicycle, someone walking a dog, the distant sound of a neighbor's grill. He read the message once. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel the urge to respond with something cutting or generous or final. He felt something much quieter than any of those things. The settled understanding of a man who is completely clear about where he is and how he got there. He held the phone for a moment. Then he pressed delete, not out of cruelty. He was not a cruel man and had never been one. He deleted it because some doors need to close completely. Not slammed, just closed. Quietly, with intention, and for good. That is not bitterness. That is the last act of self-respect. He set his phone face down on the arm of the porch chair. Down the street, Miss Ruth waved from her own porch, the way she did most evenings. He lifted his glass in her direction. The air smelled like cut grass and the first warmth of coming summer. He exhaled slowly. That was the final moment of that chapter. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a last word, not any kind of performance at all. Just a man on a porch choosing what came next. Stay with me for just a little longer, because what Kamani builds in the months that follow, and a single moment on a new porch with his mother, is the ending this story deserves, and the one every person listening has been waiting for. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Kamani Brooks moved into a new house. Not a larger one, not a grander one, just a quieter one. A craftsman-style home in a pocket of suburban Atlanta, where the streets were wide and unhurried, and the neighbors were the kind of people who wave from their porches and actually mean it. He had designed a few details himself, the way the back windows framed the tree, the depth of the front porch, the angle at which the morning light would fall through the kitchen windows in the early hours when the day was still new. The first thing he planted in the backyard was an oak tree, smaller than the last one, just beginning, roots still learning the soil. He watered it the morning after he moved in the gray early light before the neighborhood was fully awake. He was starting a foundation again, the right way, on his own terms. His mother came over on a Saturday afternoon, the way she always had. No invitation required, just the sound of her car in the driveway and the smell of something baked within a few minutes of her walking through the door. That Saturday, it was lemon pound cake from scratch, the real kind that fills the whole kitchen. She set it on the counter, looked around at the new place with her quiet, appraising eye, and gave a single approving nod. They took their plates to the back porch as the afternoon light went long and gold through the young oak's branches. Tendue cut the slices herself the way she cut cake at every family gathering, generous, unbothered by whether it was a formal occasion. Cake was cake. You ate it while it was good. They sat for a while without needing to say much. Then Tendue looked at her son the way she had always looked at him when she wanted an honest answer rather than a polished one. Do you hate her? Kamani thought about it in the way he thought about things that mattered without rushing toward a comfortable answer, letting the real one surface. No, he said, I don't. Tendue waited. I think she was chasing something she had convinced herself was better. The problem wasn't ambition. I always respected that about her. The problem was she decided the thing standing between her and better was me. And once she decided that, she stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an obstacle. He looked at the oak tree. You can't build anything real on top of someone else's foundation. You just end up with a structure that doesn't belong anywhere. Tendue picked up her fork, took a bite of cake, and said nothing. In her language, that was complete and total agreement. After a moment, she said quietly, you know, when you were small, you used to take your toys apart, not to break them, to see what was holding them together. Then you'd put them back. Always better than before. Kamani smiled. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The company was growing. The story, which Kamani had not sought and would not have chosen, carried an unexpected weight in certain rooms. 2 commercial developers who had watched the live stream reached out within 3 weeks of it going public. Both were direct about their reasons. We work on projects that take years, one of them said at their first meeting. We need partners who don't make decisions under pressure. We saw how you handled yourself. That's what we're looking for. Both contracts were signed by spring. Kamani brought on 2 new project managers, expanded into a second market, and kept doing what he had always done, building things carefully, making sure the load was properly distributed, checking his foundations before he added any weight. The work was good, honest, and physical, and satisfying in the specific way that making real things is satisfying because you can drive past them years later and they are still standing exactly as you designed them. Men from across the country found his contact page, some through the story, most through his company's growing reputation, and sent him messages. Some had legal questions. Some had marital situations they didn't know how to navigate. Some just needed someone to tell that they understood precisely the feeling of sitting in a truck in the rain and hearing themselves described as a problem to be solved. He answered everyone personally. He always said some version of the same thing. Don't wait until something goes wrong to protect what you've built. Not just financially, in every area of your life. Build the kind of foundation that holds without anyone else's help. And when someone tries to leave you with nothing, they'll find out you were never standing on borrowed ground to begin with. On a warm evening in late spring, Kamani sat alone on his new front porch. The street was doing its gentle, ordinary things. A child on a bicycle making wide, slow circles at the end of the cul-de-sac. Miss Ruth rocking across the way. The distant percussion of someone's grill, the smell of cut grass and approaching summer drifting through the warm air. He wasn't thinking about Zariah. He wasn't thinking about mediation rooms or group chats or Instagram live streams or any of it. He was thinking about the oak tree in the backyard, the way it would look in 10 years, in 20. The slow, unannounced work of a root system going deeper every season, building something no one on the surface would ever see until the day they tried to move it and discovered it wasn't going anywhere. He felt sitting on that porch, something he could only call intact, like a man who walked through something designed to take everything from him and arrived on the other side with more than he started with. Not more money, not more standing, not anything you could list in a legal folder. More himself, more certain of what he was made of, what he stood for, and what he was willing to build next. This story teaches us 4 things worth writing down. 1. Know what you own and know it in writing. If you have been married for decades and cannot name what is in your joint account, your spouse's retirement fund, or whose name is on the deed, sit down this week with a notepad and find out. Not out of suspicion, out of self-respect. 2. A sudden change in warmth is not always love returning. Sometimes it is someone buying time. Pay attention to timing, not just feeling. 3. When someone begins treating you like a problem to be managed, do not argue your worth. Quietly secure it. Dignity is not defended with words. It is protected with action. 4. The people who calculate against you in silence are counting on your emotions to slow you down. The most powerful response is not anger. It is preparation. Kamani did not win because he was lucky. He won because he paid attention, moved carefully, and never once confused patience with surrender. That is a lesson for all of us. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. These scripts are born from genuine human creativity and a desire to confront social truths. AI acted as a co-pilot, helping organize thoughts so that powerful messages of fairness, forgiveness, and human potential could touch hearts worldwide. Side.